I wasn't supposed to be there that late. The building had already gone quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own breathing. I was just the last electrician on rotation, checking a faulty breaker in one of the older offices, room 212. That's where she was. Her office looked lived in, like she'd claimed it against the years. A mug with a faint lipstick print sat by a half-drunk cup of coffee, papers fanned out in a soft chaos that somehow made sense only to her. She didn't look up when I knocked, just said, "Come in," in that voice people use when they're used to being interrupted. I told her about the outage. She nodded, barely looking up, pin still moving. She wore her hair pinned up. A few strands had slipped loose, catching the light. I don't know why I noticed that. Maybe because everything else about her was controlled. Her tone, her posture, her space. When the lights flickered again, I said I might have to kill the power for a bit. "Do what you need," she said. And then, after a second, softer, "Just don't take too long." That shouldn't have meant anything. It did. The room went dark. Only the streetlight through the blinds painted her in slats of pale orange and shadow. I could still hear the scratch of her pen, then the quiet click as she set it down. "Guess that's my cue to stop pretending to work," she murmured. Her voice carried in the dark, not flirtatious, not distant either, just unguarded. I laughed under my breath. Most people panic when the lights go out. I'm not most people. I could feel her looking at me, not see, but feel. I told her I'd be done in a minute, crouched near the panel, tools clinking softly. My hands weren't steady. I tried not to think about why. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, just charged. Then, out of nowhere, she said quietly, "You're good at this. You don't rush." I didn't know what to say. Compliments from people like her, older, composed, used to being in charge, hit different. They stay in your throat. When I stood up, the darkness still wrapped around us. "That should fix it," I said. "Just need to flip the main switch back." And she asked, almost teasing, "You sure you want to? It's kind of nice like this." Something in her tone made the air thicken. I froze. She was close. I could tell by her breathing. Then, softly, barely above a whisper, "Good. Now you can't see how much I want you." I didn't move. Didn't even breathe. The lights came back on a second later. Sharp, fluorescent, too bright. She was standing there, calm again, like nothing had happened. Her hand brushed the desk. Mine brushed the doorframe. Neither of us looked directly at the other. "Breaker's fine," I said, my voice lower than before. "Good," she replied, and smiled. "Wouldn't want the building falling apart." I left before I could make a fool of myself. But the walk down that hallway felt longer than usual. I could still hear her voice, quiet and unshaken, threading through the buzz of the restored lights. And for the rest of the night, even after I went home, even after the silence swallowed everything, one thought kept repeating in my head, as if the dark had left it there for me to find. She didn't sound like she was joking. The next time I saw her, the office smelled like old paper and strong coffee, the kind of aroma that made you feel like you'd stepped into a story someone else was living. I was supposed to be checking some wiring in her corner, a flickering outlet that had annoyed her for weeks, but it was hard to focus on the task when she was there, seated behind the desk, sleeves rolled up, eyes tracing the lines of a report. "Thanks for coming," she said, her voice steady, but her fingers lingered over the papers longer than necessary, almost like she didn't want to meet my eyes. I crouched near the outlet, pretending to study the wires, but I couldn't ignore the subtle tension in her posture. The way she kept brushing stray hair behind her ear. The faint crease between her brows, small but telling. Is it always this stubborn? I asked, half to myself, half to her. She gave a short laugh, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You could say that," she said, leaning back slightly. Her gaze flicked toward the window, and then away, as if she had a habit of looking for something she didn't expect to find. I noticed the way her hands rested on the desk, elegant, strong, but with a softness that suggested she carried more than she let on. A small tremor in her fingers when she reached for her coffee made me pause. She hadn't meant for me to see it, I knew, but I did. For a moment, there was silence between us, filled only by the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead and the distant sounds of the city. I worked slowly, intentionally, just to be near her without making it obvious. "You seem tired," I said, almost without thinking. She stiffened for a heartbeat. "It's nothing," she murmured, but her shoulders sagged just slightly. I could feel the weight she carried, the walls she built around herself. I wanted to say something comforting, maybe, but all I could manage was to glance at her, silently asking if she needed someone to notice. She looked up, caught my eye, and for a flicker of a second, her expression softened. Then she straightened again, composed, guarded. Finally, I finished the repair, standing and brushing the dust from my hands. She watched, quietly, her eyes tracing my movements, as if she were trying to memorize something she didn't want to admit she was drawn to. As I moved to leave, she leaned just slightly toward me, her hand brushing the edge of the desk, too small a gesture to seem deliberate, yet it sent a pulse through the space between us. Her gaze lingered longer than necessary, and for a moment, I imagined the words she might have whispered in the dark, if only the office lights weren't back on. I left feeling the warmth of her presence, like a quiet pull I couldn't name, and even on the long walk back to my van, I kept seeing that brief, hesitant flicker in her eyes, a softness she didn't offer anyone else, not openly, not yet. And somehow, I knew I wouldn't stop thinking about it. The rain started softly at first, tapping against the windows of the office like it was nervous about being noticed. By the time I arrived, it had grown into a steady drizzle, blurring the city lights outside into streaks of gold and silver. She was there already, desk lamp on, sleeves rolled back, leaning over a pile of invoices. The glow caught the lines of her face, the faint weariness around her eyes, the tight set of her jaw, and I realized I hadn't seen her like this before, just alone in the quiet. "I didn't expect anyone to be here this late," she said without looking up. Her tone was casual, but the slight hitch in her voice told me otherwise. I pulled a chair up beside her, pretending to review some wiring notes I'd brought along. "I didn't expect it either," I said. "Guess we're both night owls." She smiled briefly, one corner of her mouth twitching, then returned to her papers. The storm made the room feel smaller, the hum of fluorescent lights mixing with the rain. I felt closer than usual, not in inches, but in something harder to measure, the kind of intimacy that comes from long silences shared side by side. Her hand brushed against mine as she reached for a pen. It was fleeting, accidental, but I noticed. My fingers stiffened for a second before I could convince myself it didn't matter. She didn't seem to notice, or she was too polite to comment, and I wondered which it was. Then her phone buzzed, sharp against the soft rhythm of rain. She glanced at the screen, hesitated, and sighed. "It's someone from earlier," she murmured. Not enough information to make sense of it, but enough to feel the tension spike. She tucked the phone face down, as if hiding it from both of us, and turned back to her papers. I wanted to say something. Anything. To fill the space the phone call had left open, the weight of the storm pressing against us, the brush of our hands that neither acknowledged. But I stayed quiet, my pulse quickening anyway, because I could feel the unspoken line hovering between us. Her eyes flicked up for a second, catching mine, and I thought I saw it there. The hesitation, the almost confession, the trace of a secret she wasn't ready to speak. The way her gaze lingered, and then shifted, made my stomach tighten. I leaned just a fraction closer, only to freeze when her sleeve slipped slightly, exposing a pale forearm. She adjusted her posture quickly, back to perfect composure, like nothing had happened. My own hand hovered in the space between us, but I didn't move. Something inside me wanted to, and something else told me not to. The rain pattered louder. A flash of lightning illuminated the room, sharp and sudden, and for a heartbeat, I could see every detail. Her hand brushing the desk, my shadow falling across it, the tiny space that almost connected us. And then the storm carried our near moment away, leaving the air tense and electric. I stayed, frozen, heart pounding, watching her tuck another stray strand of hair behind her ear, waiting for the right word that never came. I left my hand inches from hers, trembling slightly, unsure if I was holding back or just too afraid to cross the line. That small hesitation, the almost touch, was enough to linger long after the rain had stopped and the lights were back to their usual hum. The office smelled of rain-damp carpet and old paper. The hum of the lights felt louder than usual, like it had been waiting for us to finally notice. She was at her desk, half turned toward the window, watching raindrops trace paths down the glass. I lingered near the doorway, pretending to check the wiring one last time, but every nerve in me was tuned to her. She started, then stopped. Her pen hovered over a blank page, tapping lightly. She let out a small breath, as if deciding something inside her was too heavy to hold anymore. I swallowed. Yeah. Her eyes lifted to mine, unflinching. For once, she didn't hide behind her calm exterior. Do you ever wonder what we're doing? I froze. The question wasn't playful, wasn't coy. It wasn't even angry. It was stripped bare, like she'd pulled it straight from her chest and set it in front of me. I wanted to answer, but the words tangled in my throat. I don't know, I said finally. My voice was quieter than I intended, too low for her to hear clearly, though she did. She nodded slowly, not with agreement, just acknowledgement. She leaned back, stretching her shoulders in a way that suggested relief and tension at once. It's confusing, she said, almost to herself. Her fingers drummed lightly on the desk. You and me, this, whatever it is. It shouldn't feel like this. I looked down at my hands, fidgeting with a loose wire. Every part of me wanted to reach for her, to erase the unease in the room, but I didn't. Instead, I studied the small things, the line of her jaw, the way her hair had loosened in strands around her face, the subtle exhaustion in her eyes. She sighed, longer this time. I can't pretend it's normal anymore, she admitted. The words hung between us, heavier than any touch, louder than any noise the office had made all evening. I felt it press against my chest, making it hard to breathe, making every instinct scream to close the distance we had so carefully maintained. I finally looked at her properly, and for a moment, we just stared. No words, no gestures, only presence. Only the weight of the silence that had carried everything we hadn't said until now. You make it hard, she whispered, almost breaking, almost confessing, almost giving herself away. Her voice was a fragile thing, trembling on the edge of vulnerability. I wanted to tell her it was mutual, that every glance, every brush of a hand, every fleeting second of proximity tore me up too. But no words came. Only that quiet ache between us, stretching into eternity. Then she shifted slightly, fingers tightening on the edge of her desk, and the silence finally gave way to something raw and honest. I don't know if I can keep doing this, she said. And just like that, the unspoken tension, the questions we'd been dancing around, the forbidden pull that neither of us wanted to admit, it all pressed down. Her next words, barely audible, hit me harder than any confession could have. I think. I'm already too far gone. The office smelled faintly of old coffee and paper that had been touched one too many times. She was seated at her desk, leaning back with her hands folded, eyes distant, staring at the rain-streaked window. I hovered near the doorway, trying to convince myself I had a reason to be there, checking the lights, monitoring a short circuit, anything that kept me near her without seeming intrusive. Do you ever think about what could have been? She asked suddenly, not looking at me, letting the words drift through the quiet room. I blinked, caught off guard. What do you mean? She sighed, soft but weighted, like she'd carried it for years. Before all this, before life got complicated, before people left. You know, those moments you don't talk about, but they never really leave you. I moved closer, careful not to step on the fragile rhythm she'd set. She didn't flinch, didn't gesture for me to stay away. There was trust in that, or maybe just exhaustion. I lost someone, she continued, voice almost breaking. Someone I thought I'd always have. It was years ago, but it still feels like yesterday sometimes. She finally looked at me then, and for the first time, she seemed smaller, human in a way she rarely allowed. I swallowed. I didn't know if I should speak or stay quiet. I remember you telling me once, a long time ago, about him. I said, tentative. The photo in your office, the one by your desk. I've seen it. You weren't ready to talk, but it's there. Her eyes widened slightly, then softened. "You noticed that?" she murmured. I thought no one did. I nodded, careful. "I did. I can't pretend it doesn't mean something." She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hand brushed against the desk, lingering over the small frame. "It does," she whispered. "It meant everything. Still does, in a way. But I never let anyone in after that." For a moment, the room was just her and me, and the rain against the windows, and the hum of the lights. The space between us felt heavier, charged in a way that had nothing to do with wires or repairs. "I guess that's why it feels so strange with you," she admitted quietly. "Because I don't know how to do this. How to let someone see me like this again." I reached out, almost reflexively, hand hovering near hers. She didn't move, but she didn't pull away either. The tension between us was electric, yet tender. And then, without any grand gesture, without words meant to fix or comfort, she placed a small, fragile hand on mine. Just a fingertip brush, and the weight of her past, her heartbreak, and her restraint collided with the pull I'd felt for her all along. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I only let that quiet, seismic moment linger, knowing that everything between us had just shifted and that nothing would ever be the same. The office was empty, the hum of the fluorescent lights softer now, almost forgiving. Outside, the city had gone muted under a low-hanging fog, the kind that makes everything feel suspended. I found her at her desk, quietly stacking papers, the weight of her earlier confessions still settling in the air between us. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't need to. She didn't look up, and somehow that made it easier to stay, to simply be present. "You're still here," she murmured finally, almost as if noticing me for the first time in hours. Her voice was calm, steady, but there was a softness I hadn't heard before, a letting down of armor that made the room feel smaller, intimate, like we had our own gravity. "I'm not leaving," I said simply. "No heroics, no grand intentions, just a fact." Her fingers brushed the edge of a paper, lingering there as if weighing whether to reach for something more. Then she set it down and exhaled slowly. I don't know what this is," she admitted. Her eyes, for the first time without hesitation, met mine fully. No teasing, no guard, just truth. "I don't either," I said. "But it's enough to be here now. With you." The storm from earlier had passed, but the tension lingered, quiet and insistent, like a pulse you couldn't ignore. I took a careful step closer. She didn't flinch. Her hand moved just slightly, not reaching, not asking, and I noticed how small it seemed against mine, how light the weight of her hesitation was. Slowly, as if testing the gravity between us, I let my fingers brush hers. Not holding, not grasping, just a touch. She didn't move, didn't pull away. The tiniest contact, and it felt inevitable, a culmination of all the nights, the silences, the small acts that had brought us here. We didn't speak after that. There was no need. Every glance, every pause, every shared breath said more than words could. Sitting there together in the quiet office, letting the soft hum of lights and the distant fog-shrouded city fill the space, it felt real. Earned. Human. She tilted her head slightly, enough that my forehead could almost rest against hers. I held still, giving her that choice. She didn't push me away, and the slight warmth of her presence, so near, so tangible, was enough. The clock ticked somewhere in the background. Outside, the city remained muted, waiting. Inside, we didn't need to wait anymore. Not for words, not for answers. Just for presence, and the small, quiet affirmation of a connection that had built itself patiently, fault by fault, secret by secret. And when I finally leaned in, not a kiss, not a declaration, just close enough that the space between us disappeared, I realized that some things didn't need to be named to be true. We stayed like that, quiet, unhurried, letting the world move around us. And in that gentle stillness, everything felt finished and yet beginning all at once. It's quiet now, though not the same kind of quiet that used to fill that office. It's softer, warmer, the kind that lingers in your chest long after the lights go out. I think about her sometimes, not just the woman I admired from across a dimly lit room, but the person who let me in, carefully, and who let herself be seen in ways she hadn't in years. I've changed too, though I don't always recognize it right away. I'm slower to dismiss moments, more willing to notice the little things, the flicker of a glance, the curve of a smile, the way someone can carry entire histories in the tilt of their shoulders. I carry that now, and I carry her in it. She's changed, I think. Not in some dramatic, fairy tale way, but in the subtle, human ways that matter. A softness in her laugh that wasn't there before, a willingness to pause and let someone share the weight of her world. She's still her, composed, strong, layered, but she's not alone anymore, and I can feel that in everything about her. What we had wasn't instant, wasn't loud, wasn't something that could be wrapped up neatly in a scene or a line. It was built quietly, out of silences, fleeting touches, small confessions, and the slow burn of being present for each other. And that's what makes it real. That's what makes it stick. I remember the first night the lights went out, the brush of our hands, the way her eyes held mine for a fraction too long. I remember the rain, the hesitant smiles, the almost confessions, and all the small, impossible moments that led here. And I realize now, what we had was never about rushing towards something, but letting something grow quietly until it became undeniable. I've learned that love isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's simple, fragile, earned one glance, one careful step, one whispered admission at a time. Sometimes it's staying, even when it's easier to go, even when the world tells you not to. And sometimes, it's just that quiet presence beside someone who finally trusts you with the parts of themselves they've kept hidden for years. We don't need to declare it. We don't need to label it. It exists, undeniable, persistent, real. And that's enough. If this story made you feel something, even a small flutter of recognition or longing, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this? Because sometimes, the quietest stories leave the loudest impressions.